Hey everyone, Howard from Blue Collar DM here. So you want to play Dungeons and Dragons, but the first thing you need to have is a character. So what are you supposed to do when you have no idea how to make one yourself? Today's episode is going to go on to talk about character creation, how to fill out your character sheet, and just basic guidelines on playing your character and what roles are involved. Let's get to it. So you're going to build a character. So the first thing you're going to have to ask yourself kind of is, what do I want to play and what am I looking to do in the game? Today we're going to go over some examples or an example of how you would fill out your character sheet for one particular kind of player. We're actually going to build a character sheet for a human fighter because it's one of the ones that's easiest to kind of give you an example on how to fill out your sheet. But why do we want to play a fighter? Well, depending on what you want to do in the game, like maybe you just want to be a kind of a guy that's like really good at hitting things. And that's kind of like the general gist we're going to go with this. But the important thing is to also give this guy a backstory, which we'll talk about later on. So before we can really get into some of the backstory stuff, and now that we know that we want to play a human fighter, let's go over to the computer and I'll show you how to build your character. The first thing we have to ask ourselves is, what exactly do we want to do? What kind of character class do we want to be? What kind of thing are we looking for? At the end of the day, it's all up to you about what you want to do, but for our case here, we're just going to go with basic vanilla human, and we're going to go fighter just to make this kind of an easy way to figure out how to set up your first character sheet. So now that we know that we want to play human, we'll obviously just write human up here, and like I said, we're going to do fighter, so we're going to just put fighter 1. The 1 just meaning that this is your first level of your character. So now that we have a general idea of what we want to be, obviously we got to come up with a character name. So we're just going to pick a random name, so let's just go Lenny Two Shoes. Sure. So don't worry so much about this stuff. We'll get into that kind of later. Obviously this is going to be Blue Collar DM, so that's good. So the first thing we're going to have to look into is like, what are our stats going to be? This character sheet that I have here that I got from the Wizards website is going to kind of populate it for me. But there's 3 different kinds of stats that you can choose from. You can do rolled stats, which basically means that you're rolling 4d6, which is like your Monopoly dice that we talked about in the other videos, and dropping the lowest number. So if you roll 3 6s and a 1, you drop the 1, you take the 3 6s, you add them together, that's 18. So that's one way you can do it. Another way you can do it is point buy, which basically, without getting too crazy into it, there's plenty of calculators out there on the internet, but basically you get a certain number of points that you can put into different areas on your character sheet. There's a limit to how many you can do. The more points you put into a stat, the more it costs to make it higher. It's a little complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. The other way you can do it is stat array, which I'm going to do today. Basically, it's just the standard array of stats where you'll have some good things, not some you're okay at, and then some things you're not great at. But at the end of the day, you've got to remember here, the character we're making here is a hero. And being a hero, it's going to be probably better than your normal human, where a normal human is going to have 10s in all of its stat block areas, and it's going to have a modifier of +0. So, you know, normal human, everyday person like me and you is just going to have all 10s. But for our guy, because he's a hero, he's going to have some things that he's pretty good at, but at the end of the day, he's also going to have some things he's not so great at. Because we're doing stat array, we're going to get the numbers 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8 to distribute amongst our ability scores, which are these things over here on the left side of the character sheet, though any way we want to. So with it being a human fighter, the biggest thing that we want to do here is fighters typically going to be in melee. Sometimes it can be in range depending on how you're going to do it, but for this character, we're just going to do a standard sword and board or sword and shield fighter. So we're going to want to have our highest stats in strength, constitution, probably dexterity, and then, you know, we'll want to be pretty good at intelligence, wisdom, charisma, but at the end of the day, those for us are not going to be as important as our ability to hit things. Now, that's not necessarily going to be the case for you, depending on how, if you decide to go with rolled stats. You might have better stats all across the board, and you might be just good at everything because you're, you know, Superman. But for our case, our guy's going to be pretty good at some things and not so great at others, so it's kind of a good thing for us because it makes it a little bit more fun. So we're going to throw a 15 here in strength, just because we want our guy to really, really hit hard. Constitution, we're going to throw a 14 here. And dexterity, we'll just go with the 13. So that's a good start. And then with these final ones down here, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. Now there's some general rule of thumb on how to, typically set up your character. Normally you want to have a good wisdom just because it's used a lot in the game. But depending on how you want to play, do you want to be a smart fighter who's really good at managing the battlefield, or that's kind of the background that you're going for, then that would be something to consider. If you want to make your guy more charismatic, he's like the leader of the troop, and he's very good at like influencing people and doing what you want them to do. That's a good place to put it. So that's the kind of character I'm going to go with this particular sheet. I'm going to throw a 12 in charisma, we'll do 10 in wisdom, and then 8 in intelligence, just because for us, while our guy is really, really good at commanding a presence, he's not necessarily like smarter than your average person, but he's a good guy, so everyone kind of likes him. So for these stats right now, the way they're set up, before I even add the human stuff, which we'll get into in another second, basically everything's tiered off of multiples of 2. So a 10 is considered 0, 12 is considered a +1 modifier, and that's what I mean, the modifiers that go down here. And these are going to determine, when you roll your dice, what you're adding to the dice roll to determine the outcome. So like I said, it's multiples of 2. So we're going to see here that we're at 15. So that's 2 plus 2. So we've got 2 multiples of 2, so we're actually only going to be a +2 here. Now, if we get this up to a 16, we will be a +3, which is good. And in this case, we will eventually get to that, but you'll see. So for the 13, we're only a +1. If we hit 14, we'll be a +2. Our Constitution's already at a +2. Our Intelligence, because we're actually 2 below 10, we're going to be a -1. Wisdom, we're going to be at 0, like we talked about before. And then Charisma, because we are at that 12, we're going to be a +1. So that's a good start for our character here. So now this is a good spot actually to include some of the stuff from the human race that we picked before. Now there's 2 kinds of humans, but we're just going to use the standard vanilla human that comes from the player's handbook. So in that case, all of our stats here on the left here, all these ability scores get a +1. So our strength becomes a 16, which then, like we were talking about, makes our strength a +3. Our dexterity becomes a 14, so now we have a +2 for our dexterity, which is a good way to start. Doesn't really affect our constitution all that much, but it's still good to have that +2 there, because that comes into play when we talk about later on how much health you have. Intelligence, again, +1. So everything across the board goes up a little bit, but the only ones that are really affected are those odd number ones that we had here before. So these 8, 10, and 12 aren't really all that affected, but the 15 and 13 that was here before is affected. So that's a good place to see that. The other thing we can take here from the human race is actually just our speed. That one's actually readily available, and in the player's handbook it's actually just 30 feet. So we'll just write 30 feet right there, and there we go. Now you're probably wondering why I haven't thrown anything over here, because now we're actually going to get into the fighter subclass stuff, but for right now we'll just put down everything here so it makes sense to you. So in the player's handbook you'll see all these, on this character sheet you'll see all these different saving throws, and then these are our skill check modifiers, and they have these little, in parentheses, little descriptors about what it is, or what it's based off of. So we can see here strength. The strength saving throw, we're actually going to take that from our strength score over here right now before we throw in all the fighter stuff, and we'll talk about how that impacts everything then. So we got a +3 here. We'll go to the dexterity. We go on +2. Constitution +2. Intelligence, we're still a -1. Unfortunately, we're not we're just below average as far as our intelligence is concerned. We got a +1 here on, we got a 0 on wisdom, actually. And then our charisma is going to be a +1. We're pretty charismatic compared to the normal average bear. Then we go down here into our skill checks. So this is where we take everything from over here. So for our acrobatics, which is based on our dexterity, that we can see right there, we're going to add that +2 in there. Wisdom, unfortunately, our animal handling is going to be only a 0, which not the worst thing in the world. Our Arcana is going to be a -1, which is just basically an understanding of magical things and items and magical spells, which, I mean, our guy is just a vanilla human fighter that we're going to say actually that's going to be a normal above average guard in our case. We'll talk a little bit more on the background of this guy in a little bit, but for right now, he's not so keen on knowing what magic's all about, but maybe he'll learn some stuff on the way. We'll find out as he levels up. Athletics is going to be a +3 because our guy is, pretty yoked, pretty jacked, so he'll be able to, jump and, grapple and do things that normal people can't do. His deception is +1. He'll be able to be a little bit good in negotiations with individuals and stuff like that. history, and as you can see, it all goes down the list, so I'll just fill this in and you'll see it right after when I'm finished. Okay, so that's all of our scores here in the skill checks area. Now, if you're not 100% sure where a certain number is derived from, you can actually look right here, like I said before, next to the item that's describing. So like, for example, our investigation, it's based on our intelligence, which is a -1 right now because our intelligence is -1. So that's where that comes from. So now we're going to go on to some of the little more complicated things in this character sheet. So I'll try to take my time. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out or leave a comment down in the comments section. This right here, inspiration, is something your DM actually will hand out, so we're not too worried about that in this case. But again, if you have a question, I'll be able to answer a little bit more to that at that case. So here we're at proficiency bonus. So we can actually take this straight from either the player's handbook, or I believe the standard reference document should have that information, but don't take my word for it. If you have a player's handbook, it should be in your class table that you have on your book. So if you look at the fighter table, level 1 for every single character in the game, actually, it's going to be a +2. So what's proficiency? Proficiency just means that you're good at certain skills that you normally you wouldn't normally be good at as a normal person. So like we were saying before, like if you're just a regular person like you and me, all these would be zeros. Everything would just be kind of boring. Maybe one or two of these stats you might be better in. Like if you're a history teacher, your history might be a +1 or +2 or something like that. But for the most part, everything's going to be 0. This proficiency bonus just actually basically just determines what you're good at, what you're really good at. For example, our dexterity here is actually a +2. So you might actually be really, really strong and be able to jump from building to building and have really good acrobatics, and you might be even better at that than, say, you would be necessarily at picking locks, which is what sleight of hand is for. But in any case, we're going to derive all of our proficiencies that we're going to add from the player's handbook or the SRD like we were talking about before. So if we look at our player's handbook, we'll actually see that as far as saving throws is concerned, the fighter is actually proficient in strength and in constitution saving throws. So I don't know if this is coming up very well on my screen here, but I've checked those boxes. It looks like it's not doing too well. But so because of that, we can actually add our proficiency bonus to this score. So we take our 3 over here from strength, and then we take the +2 from proficiency bonus, and we make this a 5. Pretty simple. I know we got to do math, but hey, it's part of the deal. When you decide to play Dungeons & Dragons, unfortunately, you have to do some math. So then naturally, Constitution here, +2, we can add that +2 proficiency, so we're going to be a +4 here. Pretty simple. So now we're going to go down to these skills. So these are a little bit more customizable depending on how you want to play. For the fighter, you get to choose 2 from either acrobatics, animal handling, athletics, history, insight, intimidation, and perception. There's a lot, but for our guy, we're going to pick athletics because we're just going to say that our guy is, you know, absolutely jacked out of his mind and can do crazy things. And then we're also going to pick perception because while our perception is only a 0 down here, which is not the greatest, and there's a mechanic reason why that is, we want him to be a little bit decent at being aware of where he is on the battlefield and what's going on, so we'll give him a little bit of perception bonus there. So next thing we're going to look at is actually initiative. So initiative is derived strictly from your dexterity. There are certain things that will impact it, like certain character classes. Their initiative will actually be impacted based on some skills from their class. But in our case with the fighter, in our specific fighter's case, he's just he's just going to be a +2. So, and that again comes from your dexterity. So for hit points, we're actually, because it's our first level, we're going to derive that actually from, everyone starts out with a certain hit dice. Now for our fighter, his hit dice is actually 1d10. So it's that 10-sided dice. If you have any questions on hit dice and what they are for, I can explain that in another video. But basically, in a short rest, you get to roll one of those dice to recover hit points if you've lost any. It's a basic generalization on how to explain that. So when we're looking at hit points for first level, we actually start out with 10. So a total of 10. So we take that maximum number from hit dice, and we're going to add our constitution modifier. So in our case, it's +2. So we got 10 + 2. So we got 12 hit points at first level, which isn't too bad. It's better than some of the other classes that only start out with, if they have a d6 hit dice, like the wizard, for example, they put in 6 plus their constitution. Unless they have a good constitution, they're going to be struggling for a little while. So now we're going to look at some of the other proficiencies. So we're going to come back down here. For passive perception or wisdom, it's basically just going to be our perception score here plus 10, so in our case our perception is plus 2 from the proficiencies that we got from our fighter class. So passive perception is going to be 12. So now if we go to other proficiencies in languages, so for armor, so for the fighter in the book, their armor proficiencies are actually just all armor, which is great because you can pick anything, and shields, which are going to be, if I can spell shields right, are a great thing to have, especially because we're going to have a guy that's going to be holding a sword and shield. That's what we want. As far as weapons, our fighter is actually going to be proficient in pretty much every single weapon. He's proficient in simple weapons, which there are certain different categories of weapons in the player's handbook, but for the most part, they're the stereotypical kind of like dagger or club. There's more than, they get a little more complicated than that, but then also martial weapons. So these are like your long swords and some of the, things that require a little bit more skill in order to wield. And then for tool proficiencies, in our case, our fighter isn't proficient in any of them, which, oh well. Our guy is good at one thing. He's good at fighting. That's what he's good at. He's not good at picking locks. He's not good at, making beer or any of those kinds of things. He's good at fighting, and that's what he is, and that's what his role is on the battlefield. So now for equipment, we have to decide what we want to give our guy. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. The player's handbook does have a way you can do it to roll for gold to see how much you have, and then you can pick whatever you want. But in our case, we're just going to pick from the starting equipment from the book. So for the first part, we get to pick our armor. So we get to pick either chainmail or leather armor. For our case, our guy is he's going to be kind of a tank, so we're going to try to protect him as best we can. So we're going to go with chainmail. For the next section, we get to pick a martial weapon and a shield. So we're going to pick the longsword, and we're going to take a shield. Pretty simple. The third section, we get to actually choose a couple different things. So if we want to have some flexibility with our guy and have him be able to throw things, like be able to shoot things from range if he's not quite in the mix of the battle, we can actually either take one of two things. We can either take a light crossbow or 20 bolts, or we can take 2 hand axes. In the other, actually, before I forget, in the longsword and shield example, we also could have taken 2 martial weapons. So we could have taken any two martial weapons if we wanted to try to dual wield. Believe you can dual wield short swords if you want to, but in our case, we're just going to stick with the shield and longsword. And like I said, we can either pick a light crossbow or 2 hand axes. For our guy, we're going to just pick up a light crossbow just because it's pretty easy to wield. It's going to have 20 bolts. If the thing with hand axes is they're great because you can throw them, but then you have to go over there and get them, pick them up. If you aren't in a situation where you can do that, you lose one of your ranged weapons. So that's kind of a bad option, in my opinion. But it's up to you at the end of the day. If you want to throw hand axes, all the more power to you. It's pretty cool. It's pretty awesome to be able to say that, yeah, my guy throws axes at people. It's funny. And then the last thing we get to pick is either a Dungeoneer's pack or an Explorer's pack. We're just going to take a Dungeoneer's pack. There's an entire section in the player's handbook that dictates what's in the Dungeoneer's pack, but for what we're doing to set up our character sheet, it's not really that important right now. All right, so now that we have our items, we can actually start filling in some of this attack area. So if we're going to go up here, we're going to have the longsword. It's attack bonus. So our attack bonus is going to be derived kind of like how our proficiencies are derived. So if we're proficient in martial weapons, like the longsword is a martial weapon, we get to add our proficiency bonus plus our attack stat, which in this case for any melee attacks, it's going to be a +3. Now there are some exceptions. Daggers can actually be used based off your dexterity modifier, but that's because they're light weapons. It's a little bit different. They're light finesse weapons actually is what it is, the finesse trait. But in our case, our longsword is not finesse, or we're not using it in a finesse way. So we're going to rely on our strength. So we're going to have a +3, +2. So our roll to hit or attack bonus is going to be a +5. So when we roll an attack to try to hit somebody, whatever we roll, we add 5 to it, and then we check that against the target's armor class or AC, and we learn if we hit or not. As far as damage is concerned, the damage, if you pull it from the player's handbook, is actually going to be 1d8. So that's the 8-sided dice, and we're actually going to add 3 from our strength modifier because we actually get to add that as part of our melee attack. It's one of the basic rules of combat. And the type of damage that we're doing is slashing. So I like to put a little S there so I know that that's what that is. As far as any other attacks, we do have the light crossbow. Probably not going to use it too much, but we'll put it in here anyway. Our dexterity is actually not too bad, so we can actually throw in that +4. And then our damage is actually going to be a d8 as well, +2. and this one's going to be piercing damage, but there's also a range on this. So what we're going to actually put down is going to be a short range of 80 feet and a long range of 320 feet. I know it's not picturing up here, but it's there. But basically what that means is that if we were within 80 feet of an enemy, we get to roll our dice as normal, nothing changes. But if we're beyond 83, but closer than 320 feet, then we roll at disadvantage, which means we roll 2 d20s and we take the lowest number, and then add our 4, and then we see if we hit or not. We don't have any spell casting, so we don't have to really worry about that too much. And now we're going to grab our armor class. So our armor class is going to be derived from a couple different things. So if we go down to our items, we have the chainmail and the shield down here, which is great. So with chainmail, we don't add anything as far as our dexterity modifier like you would in some of the other armor classes or the other armor types, because it is heavy armor technically. We actually need to have a 13 strength to hold on to it and actually have it on our person. We have a 16, so there's not really a problem there. So our armor class with just chainmail is going to be 16. Now we're also going to add the 2 from our shield, because the shield actually grants us +2 AC. So we actually have 18 armor class. Now the only thing here is that because we have chainmail, I'm going to write down here on the features and traits here that we actually have disadvantage on, sorry, I'll move that, disadvantage on stealth checks. So that's something that's derived from the player's handbook. It's just basically saying that because you're wearing this big, heavy, clunky armor, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to not be noticed if you're trying to sneak around. Okay, so now we got all this stuff. It looks like our thing's all pretty much all set, except the fact that we actually need to add in some of the fighter stuff. So we've done everything except for adding in all the fighter stuff and a background. So for fighter stuff, or the rest of the fighter class, let me just fix this really quick because it should be there, and we have 1 hit dice available, so we'll put a 1 there. So for our fighter class, we have a couple different abilities. So one of them is a fighting style. The fighting style we're going to actually choose for this particular guy is going to be the defensive fighting style. So defensive fighting style. And what that basically does is when you're wearing armor, you get a +1. Let's see if I can make it a little better. +1 to AC when wearing armor. So there are certain cases where you may not be wearing armor, which is kind of weird, but happens. So our armor class goes from an 18 to a 19. So that's actually really, really high, believe it or not. A lot of people start out actually like in the 14s and 13s and stuff like that if you're a spellcasting class, or even less if you're a spellcasting class. So 19, there's a reason why we're jumping in the middle of the fight. We're probably not going to get hit too much. And the only thing that's going to really hit us maybe is going to be stuff like, say, something that's going to make us make a saving throw against our intelligence or wisdom or something like that, like a spell. But hopefully when we're out and adventuring in the beginning, we're not dealing too much with having to deal with spellcasters. But hey, you never know. The next thing we have to put in here for our fighter is going to be the other fighter ability that he gets at first level, which is called Second Wind. Second Wind, basically what it is that when you're in combat you need an extra pick-me-up to get you on, or a second wind, you can actually add some hit points back in. So if you're about, you're at like 4 hit points and you're a little worried that you're going to get knocked out on the next turn, you can use your Second Wind as a bonus action to actually add 1d10 plus your fighter level hit points. So in our case, 1 die 10 plus fighter level, which in our case is 1, so we can add 1 plus whatever d10 hit points to try to keep us in the fight. And this, you only get so many though, that's the only thing. You only get the 1, but it does regain on a short or long rest. So that's actually really helpful for us. So the last thing we're going to need is we're going to need our background. So this is the last thing that's going to affect any of our actual stats that we're going to have in the game. So what we're going to do here is we're actually just going to put his background, because our guy's going to be a guard, he's going to have the soldier background. So if we look at the soldier background in our player's handbook, there's a couple things that they get. They actually do get some skill proficiencies. One of them they actually get is athletics. So we're already proficient in that. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go back to the fighter section and pick a different one, because we can't be double proficient at this early in the game. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to pick, let's pick insight. So this is just something that will allow him to be better able to read people, which can be helpful again in some of those situations when we're talking to people and trying to figure out what their motivations are. So throw the +2 there, and then the other, and so we have the athletics now still from a soldier background. And so then the other thing we're going to actually get is intimidation from the soldier background. So we're actually going to throw that over there. So that's going to become a +3, which is going to be really helpful for us because, again, social situations, our guy's going to be pretty good at reading people. He's going to be pretty perceptive of his surroundings, but he's also going to be able to kind of influence them from a charismatic standpoint. So then if we go back down here to our other proficiencies in languages, one of the other things that they get is they actually do get some tool proficiencies. So we actually will have something here. So the thing the soldiers get is the gaming set, and then they also get they also get a vehicle proficiency. So they actually are proficient in land vehicles. These would be like carts and stuff like that. So that helps. So if there's any checks related to land vehicles, like if we're trying to steer a cart or something like a horse-drawn carriage, that can be pretty helpful for us too. The soldier background also does get an equipment bonus. It's not really a bonus, it's more just like kind of like some cool RP items. So one of the things it does get is it gets an insignia to show like what kind of rank he is or what kind of officer he was. He also gets a trophy from a fallen enemy, which could be a number of different things. You can kind of RP roleplay this any way you want. If I can actually spell insignia right instead of writing lasagna, that'd be great. So this could be anything. This could be just like a weapon from a fallen foe or something like that. So we'll take one from the player's handbook here and just take a broken blade. We'll say that it's something from his past or something like that. It might be related to where he comes from and like what happened to him in his past. And then the other thing he also gets is a set of common clothes, which pretty much everyone gets, which is nice because we need to clothe our guy in addition to armor. And then he also gets 10 gold pieces, which is helpful just to have something to spend money with. So as far as personality traits, we can draw these from the same background, or we can make up our own. So for our guy, we're going to say he used to be a guard. So like let's just say that typically he's kind of more aggressive, assertive about himself, ideals. These are all things you can just kind of fill in and make it your own. You can also roll on the tables and stuff like that. But the biggest thing we're going to say for his flaw is that he's impatient. And the idea I have behind this character is that he used to be a guard who was fired from his post he tried to help out a local townsfolk, a child actually, who he tried to pay off the merchant where the child stole something from him to feed his family, and the guard was found out and was reprimanded for it. So that's going to be kind of his background generally, but we're going to say he's impatient because he was part of this guard order for very long. He was kind of a high-ranking official, which is why he had an insignia, and they took it away from him. So now he's actually kind of like upset about that, and he's more impatient to, figure out whether or not he wants to trust people right away. And he's actually kind of one of those people now that, like, because he was dedicated himself to this long order of guards, now he's just been thrown out really all willy-nilly for something that he thought he was doing a good thing. So now he's a little bit more, gruff and a little bit more upset, gets upset pretty quickly because, he got kicked out for what he thought was doing a good thing. So that actually kind of brings us to a good segue to alignment. We're going to say this guy's neutral good. So not to get too much into the argument of what lawful and what good is and all that kind of stuff. Basically, the good example I'm giving to you is that he paid the local baker for the loaf of bread that the kid took and thought he was doing a good thing by doing that. So he has good intentions, but he doesn't necessarily always follow the rule of the land, which means, if he was really doing what he was supposed to do, he would have, reprimanded the kid and brought him, under judgment under a judge or whatever the local townsfolk use for law. But instead, he tried to take the law in his own hands and try to do something that he thought he was being good for, but turns out that it was what he got fired for. So this is basically it. This is all we really need to play. Now, if you're a spellcaster, there's a little bit more involved, obviously. There's going to be some other weird stuff that goes on in this area, in the features and traits area. But for the most part, this is it. And it pretty much lays everything out for you. Luckily, if you have an experienced DM, or even if it's starting DM, pretty much everything comes up from this particular piece of paper. So if the DM you're in a conversation with the DM, whether it be with an NPC, for example, and you want to persuade that NPC to do something you want, the DM will ask you to roll persuasion. You find that number. In this case, it is a +1 on our chart here, and you'll just roll the dice and add that +1 modifier. It's pretty straightforward, and it's pretty nice. As far as that's concerned, it makes our life really easy to handle. So anytime you need to do anything pretty much that involves a roll, you'll refer to this table, or this chart, which is really nice and easy to handle. And that's basically how you fill out your character sheet. Now, obviously, there's more to it than just having the number crunching and everything like that on the sheet that determines how your character plays in the game. And that's kind of the most important thing about the game, is that The character sheet itself is just a template for you to know what to roll and what to add to it. It's not actually an end-all be-all on what your character actually is and how it interacts within the world. So at the end of the day, like, all those kinds of choices are completely up to you. So while we picked a basic example of human fighter in our example, you can be whatever race you want that in the Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook. If you want to be a gnome, you can be a gnome. If you want to be a wizard, you can be a wizard. It's great, and the choice is entirely up to you. But even still, even though there's those choices to make, the opportunity to give your character a unique and specific backstory is kind of what's the most fun about the game. While you may be a wizard or a fighter, you're your own wizard, you're your own fighter, and those characters get to be hand-tailored to you in the way you want to play. Do you want to be somebody who's like super aggressive and like is in everyone's face and like is very particularly stern about getting their point across whenever they're in conversation with people? Or are you a little bit more passive? Are you going to be someone who's a little bit more shy when it comes to social situations? What did your character grow up doing? Were they a simple farmhand and then they became a guard, like our fighter, for example? Or were they brought into like a wizard society at a young age, into an academy, and taught how to be a wizard from a young age, but then expelled because they broke some sort of weird rule, or whatever the case may be? I think you can see that the best part about this game is the flexibility that you can have when making your character. So now we have a little bit of a backstory, and we know what our character is going to be as far as like the class and the race that they're going to play. But now we can use those kinds of things to actually inform the decisions that our character is going to make in the game. Like, how is our character going to react when they are surprised in the middle of the night by a pack of bandits? How are they going to react when they're being put into a political situation where they have to influence a politician in order to push some sort of decision forward that would benefit the party? There's a lot of things that happen here, and there are a lot of things at play. But at the end of the day, again, the character's yours. Make it whatever you want, and then use that to actually inform how you play the game, as opposed to being stuck on, oh, my guy's a wizard, he's smart, so I guess I gotta play him intellectual. You can have a dumb wizard if you want. He might be smart in other ways, like he might be more street smart or book smart or whatever the case may be. The character is gonna be the way you wanna play it, and that's the most important part of this game. If you have any more questions about character creation, you can always leave a comment down below. You can also reach me on all my other social medias, like on Instagram and Facebook, and I actually have a TikTok now, so that's always fun. But feel free to leave a comment, ask me any questions you might have, and I'll try to help you, and share some of your own stories and some of your own characters. What's more fun for you to play, or, what did you end up doing for your first character when you first started playing? Till next time, see you guys soon.